All right. Well, I think we are mic'd and ready to go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maureen Conway. I'm the Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program here at the Aspen Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's conversation in our Working in America discussion series. Work today in America is not only a major activity of American life, but it's also an important value and source of identity for Americans. In today's economy, the greatest asset the majority of Americans have is their ability to work, since earnings from work is what supports most American families. Thus, work is both central to the economic situation of American families, and it's a strong value in American life and American public debate. But both the nature of work and the potential rewards from work have changed greatly over the past several decades in America, and in particular in the aftermath of the Great Recession, the diminishing returns to work have become an increasing source of concern as more and more Americans struggle to earn a livelihood. In the Working in America series, we discuss the experience of work in America, particularly as it influences those who are struggling in today's economy, and we bring diverse speakers to offer their perspectives and ideas on how to address the challenges we see today. We're very grateful to the Ford Foundation, to the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and to the Surdna Foundation for their support of this series. In today's conversation, we'll focus in particular on the experience of foreign-born workers, or immigrants. Foreign-born workers are an important source of work in our economy today and account for about 16% of our workforce. Over the years, America's had a number of large waves of immigration, and many of us, if not foreign-born ourselves, probably don't have to go back too many generations to find our forebears who were. So immigration is not new to us, but we're in the process of a national conversation on the role of immigration in our society, with immigration reform an active subject of discussion in Congress and in the press. So it's an opportune time to consider the experience of immigrant workers today, the challenges they face, the opportunities they seek, and the contributions they make to our economy. We have a terrific set of speakers here to lead us in this discussion, and we're also hoping that you will join the discussion. There'll be an opportunity for question and answer at the end, and you can also tweet about this, #ImmigrantWork. I will now introduce our speakers to you. You have materials in their bios, so I'm not going to read any of that. I will just try to put names to faces here a little bit. So right next to me is Ana Avendano, Assistant to the President and Director of Immigration and Community Action for the AFL-CIO. Let's see, next to Ana is Charlene Dukes, President of Prince George's Community College. Continuing on, we have Gustavo Torres, Executive Director of CASA de Maryland, then Audrey Singer, Senior Fellow, Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. And to lead us and moderate today's discussion, we're delighted to have Julia Preston, National Immigration Correspondent for the New York Times. So thank you all very much for being here, and I will turn it over to you, Julia.
All right, thank you for coming. really good to see you. I'm going to make a few comments to set us up, and then we'll start the discussion. Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama is nothing if not tenacious. In the final days before the Senate vote in June to approve a comprehensive immigration reform bill, the Republican lawmaker held forth in a tireless marathon on the Senate floor, rising time and again to warn that the legislation was a disaster for the country. Here is how Mr. Sessions summed up his case. What we know for absolute certain, he said, is that this bill guarantees three things: instantaneous amnesty, permanent lawlessness, and a massive expansion in legal immigration that will reduce wages for working Americans. This legislation, he said, is a crushing blow to the working people of this country. Mr. Sessions said the bill would flood the labor market with immigrant workers at a time of high unemployment when more than 20 million Americans do not have regular jobs. The result, he predicted, would be unfair competition, lower wages, and more Americans squeezed out of their own economy. President Obama also deploys economic arguments in the immigration debate, but he makes the case in favor of comprehensive reform. In a recent speech, the president said that reform, including a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, would be a major economic boon. Immigration, the president said, is what has kept our workforce dynamic, our businesses on the cutting edge, our economy the strongest in the world. He said reform would make it easier for highly skilled immigrants and those who study at our colleges and universities to start businesses and create jobs here in America. The president said that immigration reform will ultimately increase overall U.S. productivity, resulting in higher GDP and higher wages. Bringing undocumented workers out of the shadows also helps to put a stop to practices that undercut wages and worsen working conditions for American workers. If we don't do anything to fix our broken system, the president said, American workers will have to make do with lower wages and fewer protections. The fierce debate we are having over immigration is largely about the immigrant workforce in this country, both legal and undocumented, and its impact on the economy. In 2007, the last time that Congress tried to pass immigration reform, unemployment was significantly lower than it is now. Yet that legislation was defeated by an upswell of popular resistance, including from working class Americans. The labor movement was divided, with many unions demanding to limit the number of immigrant workers, particularly guest workers, in the country. Today, unemployment at more than 7.6% is painfully high. Yet the economic arguments in favor of reform are gaining much more traction this year than they did 6 years ago. As in so many things in Washington today, the immigration debate is a duel between wildly divergent narratives about foreign-born workers. The panelists we have here today can give us a report on the realities. What work are immigrants doing? What are their training and education needs? What is the effect of undocumented status? What about millions of immigrants who are working legally? How would comprehensive reform affect the labor market? The figures suggest that this generation of immigrant workers brings many virtues and also some worrisome deficits. They bring dedication to work, family, and community, and the zeal to rise that so long has fueled American progress. Many immigrants bring useful skills, but this cohort also includes many low-wage workers with low education, limited English, large challenges raising their children in poverty, and other vulnerabilities. I hope we will have a candid discussion about this today. I think I'd like to start with Gustavo. Gustavo, can you tell us about CASA de Maryland and the immigrant workforce that you see every day? Describe what kind of work they're doing and how you see them fitting into the labor force in Maryland.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Julie. I really appreciate that. And good afternoon, all of you. Again, Gustavo Torres, working with CASA de Maryland. We are the largest Latino and immigrant organization around the Washington, D.C. area. We have more than 40,000 members. This is the power that we have in our community, and we believe that is very essential, and the way how we do it, the services that we provide, and the mission of the organization is not only provide high quality services to our community, but also build power. So we combine providing workforce development, English classes, computer classes, legal representation, as well as health and human services. But also we have a huge component of organizing, to organize the community to make sure that we fight for probably the most important issue of our generation for Latinos and many immigrants and the great majority of the immigrants, which is immigration reform. So that is what we're doing right over here. We believe, as President Obama mentioned, that we are going to make a huge difference in the market, in the economy, when we passed immigration reform. And I will insist, it's not if we pass. We believe that we are going to pass immigration reform. 2012, we believe, make it different. And that is the reason why we believe that we are like now 50% in our way to pass immigration reform. Immigrants and Latinos vote huge majority for President Obama because he promised immigration reform. He promised that it's going to pass. So now I believe that the Republicans listen very carefully, at least the leadership in the Republican Party believe that it's very important to pass immigration reform. And that is the reason we believe that during the summer and during the fall, we are going to pass immigration reform.
Okay, thank you. Charlene, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your role in Prince George's County and the type of workforce preparation that you are doing in the community college.
Okay.
And also to the extent to which you have an immigrant community in your...
Again, I'm Charlene Dukes, the president of Prince George's Community College. We serve approximately 44,000 students. We're the fourth largest community college in the state of Maryland, and we are probably serving today a little under 8,000 immigrant students between a variety of credit and non-credit programs. When we talk about credit programs, by far the majority of our immigrant students are enrolled in healthcare programs. Whether it's nursing, respiratory therapy, radiation therapy, nuclear medicine, and the like on the credit side. On the non-credit side, we're talking about programs like certified nurse assistant, geriatric training, phlebotomy. As we look at those kinds of programs, what we find is that many immigrant students want to go into healthcare. And there are, in some cases, some language barriers or some skill deficiencies. So we've been able to work out programs on both sides of the house, credit and non-credit, that allow students to get the kind of skill improvement that they need and to move in those programs at a fairly rapid pace. We also are part of a 5 community college consortium in Maryland where we've adopted what we call My Best. It's based on a model out of the state of Washington, where students are getting both language training as well as skills training within the same academic classroom that will enable them to move out into the world of work and really begin to look at family sustaining wages.
Could you give us a little sense, before we move on, where your foreign-born students are coming from and what languages they're speaking?
Well, it's interesting that, and I would say to all of you that it's quite frankly all over the map of the world. We have, in addition to certainly students who are Hispanic, Latino, certainly speaking Spanish language, we're also talking about immigrant students from the continent of Africa that they are coming in, and we find that it's also interesting that most African students are enrolled in credit programs, while most Hispanic Latino students are enrolled in non-credit short-term training programs.
Do you have any way of determining of your student body if there are undocumented students among your on
Sure,
your campus?
because of the Maryland DREAM Act, we are required to keep that kind of documentation on students who come in. Now, the good thing about the DREAM Act in Maryland, and it's a partnership that Gustavo and CASA de Maryland and Prince George's Community College have had for a long time. With both, with the previous president of Prince George's, we've been certainly working with the legislation in Maryland to get the Maryland DREAM Act passed, which became a reality for us. So we are required by virtue of that law to keep statistics on students and to be able to report that information. Now, the good thing about it, however, is that students get to attend colleges and universities in Maryland at the same cost as resident students or students who are citizens in the country. So we've been able to reduce a barrier, a financial barrier, through that DREAM Act. We've also been able to determine through private philanthropy whether or not students are available or meet the criteria for other kind of financial resources that can certainly help them as they move through the institution.
Great, thank you. Audrey, can you give us a little bit of an overview of what the immigrant workforce looks like in the United States?
Sure. I will take a big step back and talk about kind of national level picture of the immigrant labor force. And there's a couple key things that are important to keep in mind. Two big structural changes in this country. One is changes to our economy that we've seen in the industries that we are building and those that are going away. And that's been going on for quite some time, and we're heading into a greater dependence on knowledge-based industries and occupations. That means our labor force has to shift somewhat. The second big structural change is our demography. And we're aging very rapidly. Well, we will be over the next couple of decades as the baby boomers move through retirement age and start to shrink the labor force. And so what we will see over the next several decades is that almost all of the growth of the labor force at all skill levels will come from immigrants and their offspring. So as we move forward, that's where the growth is going to be, because the native-born population is not growing as fast as the immigrant population through both migration and birth rates. So there's going to be a demand for higher skilled workers. We have already been seeing that. And it's not just the US that's changing, but global economies around the world are also changing and moving in these directions. So the US has been lucky in attracting immigrants, and in fact, more immigrants have been coming to the US and are in the US now than in any other country. 1/5 of the world's migrants live in the United States, and they're a key part of our economy and our labor force. So I can go into a few more things if you'd like.
Go ahead.
The thing that makes it difficult right now for us is there's some uncertainty in terms of our economic growth, where that's going to be coming from. Unemployment rates, as Julia pointed out, are high nationally and very high in some localities and among certain workers in various occupations and industries. And so and we have some uncertainty about how we're going to change our immigration policy. Not whether we're going to get changes, but how it's going to change. And the emphasis right now and the discussions right now are how to create a set of programs and policies that fit better with our economic moment and our trajectories. So these are kind of the big things that we have going on. But just generally speaking, in terms of immigrants nationally, they make up about 13% of the US population. They're over 16% of the labor force, and this has grown over time. Back in 1970, a low point of immigration in this country, they were about 5% of the population, about 5% of the labor force. So over time, it's grown. At the same time, the educational levels and skills of immigrants has shifted and changed. We now have more immigrants in the United States with a bachelor's degree or more than those without a high school education, which is something relatively new. In 1980, just 19% of working age immigrants had a bachelor's degree or more. Nearly 40% had not completed high school. In 2010, it was 30% with a college degree or more, and 28% without a high school diploma. So things have definitely shifted. And part of that shift towards higher skilled, more highly educated immigrants has to do with the demand that I mentioned of the changing industry structure in the United States, but also programs like the H-1B, which brings in highly skilled workers. Almost all of them have to have a bachelor's degree or more as a condition of entry, supplies hundreds of thousands of visas every year. In addition, the number of international students who come to the U.S. has tripled over the past couple of decades. About 750,000 are currently in the United States. Many of them would like to stay or are able to move from a student status to a worker status. So that's pulling the high skill end up. Among lower skilled immigrants, there's still a huge demand for workers who do a range of jobs because the US-born population is becoming much more educated. So these workers are drawn to the US because there's a demand. Only 7% of US working age population does not have a high school diploma, and as I mentioned, 28% of their foreign-born counterparts lack that credential. So in terms of absolute numbers, they're about the same, native and foreign-born, same number of immigrants. But there's still this demand for lower skilled workers. So what we see is a changing underlying structure, changing sources of immigrants, and where they're putting themselves into the US labor market is also interesting. And some of my work has looked at some of the industries where immigrants are overrepresented, and I've looked at 4 primarily low-skilled industries, 4 primarily high-skilled industries where immigrants are overrepresented: accommodation, agriculture, construction, and food service on the lower skilled end, and high-tech manufacturing, information technology, healthcare, and life sciences on the high-skilled end. Together, in those 8 industries, 37% of all workers are immigrants. So we've got some strong representation in certain industries and at different skill levels that we can continue to talk about.
Okay, great, thank you. Anna, you are living and speaking with and participating with the labor force every day in your work. And the AFL has had dramatic transformation in recent years in its attitude towards immigrants and the politics of immigration. So what do you see in the labor force and the role that immigrants are playing now in the unionized labor force?
Hi. Well, first I want to say thank you to the Aspen Institute and hi to everyone here. I'm really happy to be with all of you today. So immigration is a really complicated issue. The AFL-CIO represents, there is an umbrella organization for 57 labor unions that represent workers in the entire world of work. High-skilled workers, construction workers who are both high-skilled and lesser-skilled, agricultural workers. And within this world of work, immigration has always been, it implicates economics, it's a political issue, and it's really a very emotional issue. And I don't think that we should forget that, because often when we talk about immigration policy, those of us who want to stay on the policy side of things, the rational side of things, just engage in a lot of losing arguments. So what we've learned over the years is that we really need to recognize that it's a hard issue for many people who for a long time have been living in a world that has really pitted immigrants against everyone else. And the approach that we've taken for more than a decade now is that we really need to work on behalf of working people. That as long as we have a 2-tiered workforce, where some workers have access to rights and some don't, all workers suffer because standards and conditions are lowered for everybody. And it was that acceptance and theory that really moved us in the late 90s, early 2000s, to really look at the issue of immigration policy very differently than in the past. So it wasn't just an issue of controlling the labor market. The fewer workers you have in a labor market, the more bargaining power those workers have. It was really an issue of the global economy, the demographics, and really recognizing that to grow a strong, powerful movement of working people, we needed to embrace and welcome immigrants into our movement. Our policy shifted formally in the early 2000s, and it's been evolving, and it's been happening in partnership with worker centers. We work very closely with the National Day Labor Organizing Network, of which CASA de Maryland is a member. We work very closely with domestic workers, really recognizing that many workers, by virtue of not just their immigration status, but their employment status, don't have access to collective bargaining, and really have had to think about new ways of bringing power and economic power to these workers. Domestic workers are excluded from the National Labor Relations Act. Day laborers are often independent contractors, also excluded for the protection of labor law. So working with these worker populations has really changed the way that we see the future of the labor movement. We're going through some changes now as we head into our convention in the fall, and it's been really, really, really interesting to work much more closely with all of these, what people are calling alt labor groups, and who are really young, energetic, creative organizations that represent mostly immigrant workers in labor markets where, for the most part, unions don't exist. And under conditions that are, at best, often precarious. The National Employment Law Center did a study with several academics of the low-wage labor market of Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York in 2009. And I think that you featured it in one of your presentations. And what that study found was that in these low-wage labor markets, that there is virtually no compliance with minimum wage and other basic laws. That it goes across sectors, basically. Car wash workers, taxi workers, domestic workers, construction workers are all suffering violations of law. To the point of where in these three cities, low-wage workers, a quarter of whom are immigrant or undocumented, lose $57 million a week to wage theft. That's a lot of money, and it's a whole lot of money to workers who are making the minimum wage. So really, for us, working with immigrant workers on fixing the immigration system at the same time that we're fixing this badly broken and weak labor law system is crucial to really restoring the right of workers to bargain.
Let me just follow up and then we'll come back here. But this question of high unemployment and competition for jobs, and how do you feel that? How does that play out within the labor movement? Is there a lot of tension there, or has the tension subsided? The perception that the immigrants are somehow the other or the unfair competitor?
We had a wonderful event yesterday at the Federation where Jose Antonio Vargas spoke about the value of citizenship, and he said something that really resonated with everybody. He said immigrants are not trying to take a share of the pie, we're trying to grow the pie. And I think that that's how people are looking at it, recognizing now that it really isn't about competition for really lousy jobs. It's about working together to improve conditions so that all workers benefit. Unemployment is much higher in some sectors than in others. Unemployment, there is long-term unemployment in construction, for example. And construction workers are having a really hard time. But that's true of construction workers who are unionized and not unionized. And even within the sector of construction, the competition between immigrants and undocumented doesn't really exist. I mean, it's not like you have crane operators who are competing with day laborers for those jobs. We've done a lot of member education over the past few years. We run something we call Immigration University, where we have weekly webinars and we have materials available for our members. And it's been really, when you talk this issue through with people, people understand that it wasn't immigrants who caused the financial crisis. It wasn't immigrants who brought us to this horrible economy that we're in right now. And that we're all better off by just recognizing that. And again, I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but working together to fix both the labor law system, the financial system, the immigration system.
Gustavo, you work in a climate where there has been, at times, very intense opposition, I think, to your work, if I'm not mistaken, in Maryland. And how much of that do you think, is based on a perception that the immigrants are somehow unfair, disloyal competition in the labor market? How much of the tension that you've seen over immigration in your work has to do with the labor market or a perception of the labor market, and how much of that is true or not?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a lot of wrong perceptions about that, absolutely. And we need to recognize it's called racism also, right? That they see our color of skins and they don't want to integrate the immigrant community, and in particular Latinos and Africans, right? So that is kind of a reality that we face. And our challenge and our responsibility is to make sure that we integrate the immigrant community to the society. So that is the reason why we have these very critical and important programs to make sure that we integrate the community. And I just want to refer to what I call the most successful experience that we have to integrate little by little the immigrant community, and is with Prince George Community College. We believe that is the partnership that we have developed for several years, and with Dr. Dukes, I think that is extraordinary, not only with the Dreamers, which is a very important component of our members, to make sure that we provide the services first to pass the legislation. Of course, that was an extraordinary victory for our families and our community in Maryland and all around the nation, but also to make sure that they go to the college. So the Dreamers are
does anyone need a definition of what a dreamer is? Does everyone know what we're talking about when we talk about a dreamer? Okay, yeah, go
Dreamer
ahead.
is a dreamer, pretty much. To clarify. Happen to be an immigrant dreamer. So anyway.
We're talking, but in this case, we're talking about a particular age and immigration status category of young people, yeah.
So, but another very important component of that is the adults. Like how we are integrating the adults to the society. And we have this great relationship where Prince George Community College sent to our facilities. We have vocational center in our welcome center. We have 7 welcome centers in Maryland. So Prince George Community College, as well as now we are entering an agreement with Montgomery Community College, as well as Baltimore Community College, but mostly with Prince George Community College. They send the teachers to our facilities and they provide the classes. Now we started also with healthcare, but also in construction. It's more than 1,000 adults, immigrants who have been integrated to that. And it's unbelievable. We have been tracking not only the education, but also the way how the salary increase when you complete the classes on coordination with Prince George Community College. Go from $10 to $15 per hour. It's unbelievable, that extraordinary change that happened. So for us, that experience, and again, that for us is a national model that we also, of course, are partnered with Ford Foundation to make sure that we share that experience with another different organization around the nation to make sure that we integrate our community. That includes English classes as well. Is very essential. We have a huge challenge with the English classes, so we're trying to make sure that we integrate our community in all levels. And finally, I want to mention another very, very important component of that. Right here in the Washington, D.C. area, we have a big challenge with people who are already legal permanent residents. We have more than 450,000 immigrants in the Washington, D.C. area who are ready to become U.S. citizens. But because different reasons, they are not integrated yet. Because again, the cost of the application to become U.S. citizen, the English is another challenge they face. And again, they don't know how the system works. And so we have been developed another very important model, and is to provide microloans for the legal permanent residents to become U.S. citizens, because we believe that open additional doors when you become U.S. citizens. And that is the reason why put a lot of and extraordinary efforts in partnership again with Montgomery College, with Montgomery County. The county executive play a very critical role, and Governor O'Malley also is very engaged in this initiative.
Charlene, do you want to talk about what that program looks like from your side?
Well, from our side, what we're looking at is how do we provide training in partnership with CASA de Maryland, things like heating and air conditioning, refrigeration, building maintenance engineers, looking at things like basic drywall, ceramic tiling, conservation landscaping, childcare. So, and then some of the programs we spoke about earlier when we talk about certified nurse assistant, phlebotomist, geriatric workers, those kinds of things. But we're also talking about students who also want to come into programs because they're looking at getting an associate degree, transferring to four-year colleges and universities, looking at the baccalaureate, master's degree, professional degrees, and beyond. The other thing that we're finding rather interesting at the college is the number of immigrants who, and I think that some of the statistics were already provided, who are coming with high-level degrees, and especially in healthcare areas, but we're not accepting those licenses. So that people are having to come back for retraining or looking at other careers entirely. So clearly there's still some work that we have to do in terms of people entering the country, and then how are we really giving them opportunities based upon the credentials that they're bringing with them to the United States.
The immigrants who are in your student body, is there any pattern or difference in terms of their ability to come to school and finish their work, and do they face any special burdens?
Well, I think that there are some barriers, and I will tell you that most students, quite frankly, most students who are attending community college, whether they are native to this country or immigrants, have to work. We live in a society now with the rising cost of tuition at colleges and universities, and many of you are probably aware that community colleges are open enrollment institutions. We're not necessarily looking at SAT scores or college entrance exams and what your grade point average is, or whether you're newly out of high school, or whether you're 50, 60, or 70 years of age. What we do is we say we take students in, we take them as they are, and our responsibility is to help them succeed in whatever career goal or potential that they're looking for. So, we know that most students have to work. Students are working on average probably about 30 hours a week, and then trying to take either part-time or full-time classes. And what does that mean in terms of the wraparound or supportive or intervention services that we have to have? Probably within the last 7, 8 years or so, we've created an international education center that's staffed by faculty and other professionals at the college that help with that sort of transition to college. And what is that all about? What are all of the supportive services are there? We see a huge increase in our courses where we're teaching English as a second language, either as credit courses or as non-credit courses. We're also seeing a large increase in the number of immigrant students who are coming in wanting to study for and eventually take the general equivalency diploma or the GED exam. And even as part of deferred action, that if students come in or immigrants come in and they're enrolled in GED programs, then that certainly can help them if they were young when they came to this country.
Did the deferred action bring you a number of students?
Probably.
Does everyone know what we're talking about when we talk about deferred action? Okay.
Yeah, somewhere between.
Okay, so the president, the Obama administration, a year ago exactly, started a program that gives deportation deferrals. It is not an affirmative legal status. This is simply an administrative process that cancels or suspends the deportation process.
Exactly.
But the way that the administration did it, it allows these young immigrants to have work permits, and together, and with those work permits, then that opens, that actually puts a document in their hand with which they can then enroll in school, and
they can apply for Social Security
and they can
number
apply
as
for a
well.
Social Security number. Yeah. So this
Right.
is and I think we're up to close to 500,000 young immigrants. They're still undocumented, but these are dreamers who grew up in the United States
Right.
and have become eligible for this program.
Right.
And
So in fiscal year 2013, for us, that fiscal year just ended June 30th, we had close to 4,000 immigrants that were enrolled in adult education programs. That means that it was basic reading and math and GED preparation classes. About 65% of those students were Hispanic Latino. And then when we talk about the deferred action, probably of that number, we're talking about somewhere a little less than 1,000 who've taken advantage of this opportunity.
right. Audrey, do you have any impression about the wage levels of our immigrant workforce? Any insight into what we can say about where, particularly, I think, low-wage immigrants are fitting into the overall picture of our labor force?
Sure. This is definitely a big argument in the research community and among quantitative academics. In general, I can tell you that nationally, for example, the findings show that most immigrants don't compete with their native-born counterparts. But in certain regions and in certain industries and occupations at the local level, there may be some competition, and that is particularly the case in the lower end of wages and skills. So this tends to become more of an issue and more of a topic of concern during high levels of unemployment, which is sort of where we are now. I think what's important about what Gustavo and Charlene pointed out is a lot of their programs, even though they're targeting immigrants by providing language and basic education together, these are programs that are open for everybody. So it's to bring in low-skilled workers across the board. There are some special things for immigrant students, and I think there are lots of programs across the country that do this. The model iBest that you guys are using in the state of Washington. In fact, the role of community colleges is really important in terms of bringing this group up. And community colleges, partnerships with employers, there are a lot of examples of that are really important for training workers who are in high demand occupations, both immigrants and others. And this is a way that smart regions like this one here find workers for employers who are in that region and bringing in workers to improve their skills. So there's a regional effect on the economy. If workers can move up the ladder, they're going to make higher wages, they're going to spend more money, they're going to do more for their community. So this kind of investment seems to be an important part at the lower end. And on the higher end, I should say, there's some interesting things going on there as well. It looks like when you look at immigrants with a bachelor's degree or more in this country, about half of them who are of working age and are working are overemployed for their jobs. So based on the average level of employment needed for the occupation that they're in. Among the native-born, it's about 1/3. So it's pretty high there as well, but much higher among immigrants. And here, there's some interesting movements and programs that are designed to unlock the skills, and we've mentioned a few of these kinds of things, of highly trained professionals who are already living in the United States, who have skills, but they They have foreign credentials. They may not have the English language, so there's a barrier there. They've got a few things putting them, their credentials are not recognized by U.S. employers. So there's some very nice ways that some organizations are working with these professionals to bring them into jobs, whether it's engineering or healthcare or technology, either into the occupations that they were trained for, at least in the field that they were trained for, so that we don't have engineers driving taxis and nurses doing home health care and things like that. So if we think about it regionally in terms of what it does to regional economies, there seems to be the idea that if you build on the skills of the people that you already have, then your economy is going to improve regionally.
Yeah, Gustavo.
Julia, I just want to mention something that we believe that is an extraordinary opportunities and challenges for the community colleges as well as for community-based organizations and all of that, is when we pass immigration reform. Remember that it's going to be 11 million undocumented immigrants who are going to be legalized. And part of the requirements is that they need to learn English, right? They need to pay the taxes. And I think that we call that a tsunami that is coming, right? That we need to be prepared as community colleges and community-based organizations, how we are going to welcome them and what kind of additional services. And I'm very sure that many of them, when they are going to have their social security and work authorization, they want to go to community college because that is part of the dream of our community, right? Education for us is as essential as any another different communities is the education. So for us, it's going to be a great opportunity to make sure that we partner with many institutions as we're doing right now.
Let me just, and then I'm going to ask the same question for Anna here. But to what extent your folks who are undocumented, how much are they part of the community already, and how much are they really living in the shadows? I mean, the description that you just gave is that this is going to be this kind of big emergence, a wave, a tsunami, you said. But to what extent are your folks already integrated into the community despite the fact that they're undocumented?
Well, we tried, and we're doing that for many, many years now to integrate the community as much as we can, regardless of your immigration status, right? But we need to recognize people are so afraid, very scared. Many of them have different names, false social security, because they need to work. Now we have this famous program called Secure Communities, that is, we call unsecure communities, actually, which pretty much target immigrants who are undocumented, and they deport, right now is 1.9 million immigrants who have been deported under this administration, 1.9 million. So using the famous secure community. So people are really, really scared. In the Washington metro area, and in particular in Maryland, we have a friendly government, right? Local, the county, in Montgomery County, Prince George, Baltimore City, even though we have an extraordinary relationship and they are welcome the immigrant community. But in other areas, it's like, you are targeting and have been targeted, and not only people who are undocumented, they stop me because my color of skin when I don't have this jacket, right? That is a reality. That is something that we facing every single day in our community. So answering your question about integration, not yet. And I think that is the reason. It's essential, it's critical to pass immigration reform with path to citizenship, because we don't want second class anymore, right? We want to make sure that people have the opportunity to become U.S. citizens. It's so essential for our communities.
Anna, did you want to talk about that?
I do.
What is immigration reform going to mean to the labor movement?
So let me just answer your prior question, or actually pick up on what you said, the concept of living in the shadows. I think it's important that we sort of peel that apart a little bit, because it isn't just about people having to stay home or remain in the dark. It really is about whether or not people have the freedom to really improve their lives, their economic lives and their social lives. And the truth is, for the undocumented right now, they don't. And it's by virtue of their immigration status. And in terms of the workforce, it isn't that immigration status has just locked workers into lousy jobs and prevented them from moving on or moving up the ladder. But it really is that those jobs, because workers haven't been able to improve those jobs, have remained lousy jobs. And again, that doesn't just affect the undocumented. The undocumented don't work in isolation. It affects entire labor markets. So but let me give you an example of what that means and why immigration reform is so important to working people. We're working on a case, we had been working on a case with the National Day Labor Organizing Network about a day laborer in Los Angeles who on a Friday went to get his wages, as they often do, major contractor in Southern California. And instead of getting his wages, the contractor called the police, accused him of theft, and had him arrested. He was taken to jail, but he was run through secure communities. An immigration hit came up. And so even though the charges were dropped, he was still in detention. And he was still put into removal proceedings. And when he was in jail, the day that he was just taken to jail, he met another day laborer who had worked for the same contractor, also demanded to be paid, and also had the police called on him. So this is not unusual, and I can tell you stories like this from New Orleans, which is happening right now. This is just happening a lot. And this situation isn't just about this one case, because the community hears about these cases. And coupled with the level of enforcement that we're seeing now of secure communities, 1,400 people being deported a day, it really does have a chilling effect on the community at large. And so, yeah, so it keeps people in the shadows without the ability to exercise their rights. That the day laborer was released on bond, so it's a good end to the story. But for every person like that, there are, 5, 10, 20, 100, we don't know, other workers who are still in detention because they sought not to exercise a right, not to protest or join a picket line, but just get paid. So we really need to fix the system in a way that doesn't just legalize people into some temporary precarious status, but is really going to allow people to be a part of society, to have the ability to exercise full rights. And that's what we're fighting for right now.
Just to clarify, because I think this is something that people really don't understand about the Obama administration and its immigration policy. When they're talking about secure communities, this is a program that basically the Obama administration proliferated the possibility of an immigration check into every law enforcement jurisdiction in the country. So anyone who is arrested for basically any reason in any law enforcement jurisdiction in the country can now be subjected to an immigration check at the same time that they're booked and this is, we're talking about traffic violations. This spread the immigration enforcement system to a local level in a way that had never happened in the country before. And the result of that is the flip side of an administration that is advocating powerfully and convincingly for immigration reform, but at the same time is maintaining this very severe and quite frightening for many immigrants enforcement regime out in the country. I'm sorry, did you want to?
Well, I wanted to just reinforce this living in the shadows. Even when we talk about dreamers, high schoolers who by virtue of laws passed in Maryland or DREAM Acts in other states, when they come in, there are certain questions that have to be answered. And while that young person might be eligible for something, some of those questions are based upon what are your parents doing? Mm-hmm. So do they have a Maryland tax return? Can you prove they've been paying Maryland taxes? And you can see students start to slowly walk away from the desk because they then become concerned about their mothers and fathers or their grandparents or whatever that guardian is with whom they've been living during these years. So I would agree that I think that there is just a tremendous amount of this living in the shadows that we are just not even aware of.
I'm wondering, one of the things we spoke about before the meeting started was the whole question of the role of employers in this labor force and the attitude of employers. You started to talk about that, but I'm wondering, Anna, if you could talk a little bit about the agreement that the AFL reached
Sure.
with the Chamber of Commerce, because this was a historic accord that really opened the way in a substantial extent to the possibility of the Senate legislation that passed in June.
Sure. I'll summarize a year and a half of negotiations into a minute and a half.
You're familiar with some of the details, yes.
Sure, you can do it.
So, yeah, and I mean, it's an important point. We've been talking a lot about low-road employers here, and there's a lot of employers that are actually abide by the law and are facing very unfair competition from those who don't. And so in the employer community, there was a real desire to fix the law in a way that benefited, the Chamber of Commerce's membership, but because we were doing something that Senator Schumer and Graham asked us to do, also in a way that it could be an agreement among the labor movement and the employer community that we actually found some common ground. And because this process has actually been a stop and start on immigration reform over the past few years, we've actually started conversations a long time ago and had the luxury of just talking for a while. And we really approached these negotiations from the standpoint of, okay, what are the interests here that we're going to meet? In the past, it's always been negotiating numbers. 20,000 too low, 100,000 too much. We never got anywhere. But this time we really tried to approach, and we did approach the situation, okay, what are the legitimate interests at issue here? And it was really about employers wanting to have access to workers when they need workers without a lot of bureaucracy, and to have some ability to recoup whatever costs they make in that investment. I'm simplifying a lot. And for us, it was that the workers who come here have freedom, have mobility, so they don't have to stay in a temporary job, that they don't have to stay temporary, because we're not talking about temporary jobs here, we're talking about year-round jobs that last years. And human beings are not temporary anyway, but putting that aside, that we wanted to have the ability for those who wanted to stay here and settle permanently, as so many have done, that there be some way that they could do that. And that's the basic agreement we reached, that we created and that, I should say importantly, I forgot, is we really wanted to have more transparency in this labor market. And right now, those of you who work on immigration, it's very hard to get data. We know how many visas are issued, for example, but you don't know how many are actually taken up, or there's just a lot of obscurity in this world of immigration and labor market. So we wanted to have some transparency, which, in our view, if the system was more transparent, it would have actually more acceptance among the general public. So the new program that we negotiated is called the W Visa program. It has a new Bureau of Immigration and Labor Market Research that's going to actually study low-wage labor markets and the impact of immigration on those markets and make recommendations to Congress. And a new type of visa that employers will be able to bring in workers into lesser skilled occupations. For the wonky folks in the audience, it's ONET 1, 2, and 3. And that workers are going to, and employers will register jobs. It's not now the program works like somebody sponsors a worker and that employer sort of owns that worker when they get here. The new program is that employers will register jobs, and then workers will come to those jobs, or if they're already here, will be eligible for those jobs that are in the registry. Any worker who's in a W visa worker will be able to move among any registered job, even after a day of being in that job. And they will get paid prevailing wage, and they will, under the point system in the bill, be able to adjust their status eventually once they gain enough points. So there's a chance to settle permanently, and importantly, that visa belongs to the worker. It does not belong to the employer, which so often happens now. Employers sort of file petitions for workers, but then hold it over their head. So the worker has ownership of her visa. The worker will be able to change jobs and be paid, decent wages and have decent working conditions. So that we saw that as a win-win, and that's in the Senate bill.
That's in the Senate bill. And so now we are looking to the House of Representatives. So it gives you some idea of the extraordinary assets that exist in this bill that passed the Senate, and what is at stake in terms of the debate as it goes to a much more reluctant House. did you want to summarize and then I think we'll go to questions. if you
Sure,
could.
thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out a couple of really important issues. Listening to Anna helped me think about them. So we've got this situation where the federal government has the responsibility for creating laws that are that the nation is bound to, and they can be very specific about workers and employers. But there's an interesting dynamic because where immigrants live, where they work, where they go to school, the neighborhoods they live in, the communities that they're part of, everything that goes with it is all local. So all of the dynamism of immigrant integration happens at the local level. And listening to Charlene and Gustavo, I think underscores the really important fact that there are institutions and organizations in local areas that are already doing so much to integrate immigrants and to work with communities, both Native and immigrant communities together, to make things better obviously for everybody that lives in them. And I think we get lost in this federal debate about changing the laws. But really where immigration is lived and felt is in local areas, and there are very different things happening across the country. And I will, last week we had an event at Brookings where we brought in local level leaders in municipal business and labor leader, and we talked about these things, and it was so enlightening to think about what's happening here at the federal level and how it relates back to the local level and then feeds back into the federal decisions that we're all making.
Julia.
I think that seems like a good place to open up for questions. Is that all right? Yeah. Questions? Yes. Do I need to? Yes. If you could just wait.
Hi, it's Tom Gilton.
Oh, hi, Tom.
Hi, Julia. So we've been talking a lot about competition at the lower end. But Audrey, you mentioned 4 industries where immigrant workers were overrepresented at the higher end. And I'm curious about that aspect of the competition, and in particular the idea of expanding. I assume the reason that immigrant workers are overrepresented in those industries is because the employers feel they can't find the workers they need to fill those positions more easily from native workers or whatever. And this brings up the issue of the expansion of the H-1B program. And if I'm not mistaken, this is one area that has been a little bit more difficult for the labor movement to deal with. There's been a lot of arguments from economists more sort of from the left who are very reluctant to see a big expansion of the H-1B program because they're not convinced that those jobs really are out of reach for non-immigrant workers. I guess the question for you, Anna, you certainly didn't mention that. How have you been able to deal with that issue of the H-1B, expansion of the H-1B program?
So your voice sounds very familiar. Yeah, it's a completely different conversation from what we had with the business representing the lower end of the lesser skilled workforce. For those of you who don't know, there was a very good section in S-744, the Senate bill as it was introduced, that had built significant protections into the H-1B program, including the ability of employers, the requirement that employers actually make jobs available first to workers in the United States and the local labor markets before bringing in foreign workers, and that they be required to not displace workers, because what we've seen happen too often is that employers are bringing in H-1B workers, having them be trained by local workers, and then sort of displacing them. Those provisions were stripped from the bill as a result of an amendment that Senator Hatch sought, that the high-tech businesses sought. And the political calculus was that Senator Hatch was needed to move the bill forward. You know, it's a difficult issue because as, you know, there are economists here who can deal with the economics of the issue much better than I. But from the worker rights standpoint, I just want to emphasize that these are not temporary jobs. You know, these are not jobs that are going just to engineer, but most H-1Bs go to IT jobs. And IT jobs that you are preparing our current local workforce for. So I think there's somewhat of a disconnect between the policy debate and what's happening right here. That if there are real shortages in those occupations, nobody disagrees that, of course, employers should have the ability to bring in workers to do those jobs. But as long as we want to train our workforce, and we want to give opportunities to local people, I think that we really have to rethink from a policy standpoint, how much sense does it make to allow the sort of temporary, the temporariness of the labor force. And then on the other end of the sort of the skill set, we often hear, that the best and the brightest are coming in, and Sergey Brin from Google, or I forget all the other high-tech guys, are just waiting to come in, and if we don't have more H-1B visas. Again, the part that we don't understand is the temporary nature of that argument. Why is it those temporary visas? In some way, in the Silicon Valley, because the business model there is really one of temporariness, right? Everybody's sort of creating these startups that they just exist so they'll be bought up by Google. That's the kind of I'm kidding. I'm not kidding about that. Is that fits their business model. Whether that business model is a good thing for our society or not, I think is a different discussion that we haven't yet had.
Did anyone else?
I could say something. I often think about the difference between a temporary worker and a temporary job, and they're really different things. And it's not something that's built into our immigration mindset in any way. But to just go a little bit deeper, I think there's a lot of arguments going around the H-1B, and you know better than I do on the inside what's been going on. But one thing I wanted to point out, the W visa that Anna mentioned and the provisions for the higher skilled H-1B workers are very different. They're set up very differently in the Senate bill. There were different battles that were won and lost there. And so what we don't know, let's say that the Senate bill becomes law magically. What we don't know is how the increases and the modifications to those provisions in bringing in workers, expanding them in some ways and making some permanent, whether that will reduce the need for more temporary workers or larger numbers of temporary workers, whether we'll just continue to see a lot of people coming in because of business models, whether that will change the labor force on the ground enough to move the numbers in certain ways. So I think there's a lot of open questions there that we won't necessarily know the answer to unless we implement something.
Yes.
So just as a follow-up question to Tom's excellent question on H-1B visas, my name is Gautam Ramchandani. I run an advisory firm that helps organizations unleash the potential of disenfranchised populations, such as undocumented aliens, and if you want to call them immigrants, whatever. And I guess the question is, if one were to make an economic argument for immigration reform, there are all kinds of arguments, human arguments and other non-economic arguments, but if you were to stick just by the economic arguments, on the one hand, you've got a few million high-tech jobs that are unfulfilled, even though there are 20 million people unemployed. Latest numbers I saw is that there's at least a couple of million jobs out there that the high-tech employers said they can't fill because those skills aren't available in the U.S. On the other end, you've got the low-skilled folks. There are 7 to 11 million undocumented immigrants. If they were to be documented, obviously they would contribute a lot more to the economy. So my question to all of you that study this kind of phenomena, what is the value creation potential that could be unleashed on the lower end with the 7 to 11 million low-service, low-skilled folks, and on the higher end with the 1 to 2 million high-tech jobs that need to be filled? And what kinds of policies can you address to address those two different ends of the spectrum? Thank you.
You want to?
Well, I think I'd be really interested in what Audrey's take on this is, but what we've been talking about here is how to create economic opportunities for folks on the lower end of the wage scale and the skill set to be able to someday have access to some of those jobs on the higher end of the wage scale and skill set. That's the challenge here. That's the balance that we were all trying to make here, but I think we can.
You know, I think one thing is employers always say that they can't find workers.
Right.
And part of it is that they can't find workers in the region that they're in. Part of it is they can't find workers with the wages that they want to hire them. They can't find workers who fit into very specific technical occupations and skill sets, which are changing all the time. I understand now in the tech field, it doesn't really matter what your credentials, your formal credentials are, but that employers want to know certain things like, do you work in the cloud? These are the ways that people distinguish workers. So, you know, to put a number on it, I can't give you a number. There are lots of people that try to do that, but I'm not an economist. But I do think that that when workers are working in the formal sector, are getting wages that are average or above average for their occupation, they end up contributing more, and that is how we grow the economy. And so I think, you know, those are hard answers.
Wait, I think we need, because we have a few. Yes. Oh, yeah. Why don't we go back there and then we'll come up here? Yeah.
Thank you. Michael Livingston, Interfaith Worker Justice. You talked about, Gustavo, a tsunami that will take place when legislation is passed that will be positive for those who are on a path to citizenship. I think there's another tsunami that we ought to acknowledge, that I don't hear enough of this kind of realistic talk about the effects of immigration reform. And it's for the workers who won't qualify, for the workers who can't meet the continuous employment requirement of the bill, for the workers who can't meet the income levels, 100% of poverty level, 125% as they move from RPI to LPR. I just think this discussion that I've heard in many different public settings, as well as private ones, doesn't fully enough acknowledge what's going to happen to the person at Union Station making $8.75 an hour for the last 23 years, who clearly isn't going to get on this path and maybe never complete it.
Well, thank you for bringing the voice of the voiceless, really. That is going to be a huge, huge challenge. Remember, the Senate legislation say that everybody that arrived to our country on December 31st, 2011, right? Mm-hmm. So they qualified in one way or another to have the work authorization. But then we have at least, they estimated at least from 2011, 31st December to now is like more than 500,000 people who don't qualify. Plus, I'm very sure that is another issue that probably the projection is probably between, 1.5 to 2 million immigrants who are not going to qualify for the legalization. That is a huge issue. I mean, if the idea is to resolve once and for all the situation of people who are undocumented, at least with that proposal or with this legislation that the Senate passed, we are not going to accomplish that. We are still hopeful that probably as a part of the compromise, we can resolve many of those issues. But it's going to be very, very difficult. In Maryland in particular, I want to refer about two different very important actions that we took thinking about that. Number one, of course, the DREAM. The DREAM legislation that we helped to pass in Maryland is for everybody, regardless of the immigration status, to go to college. So for those people who don't qualify, they still can go to Prince George Community College or to Montgomery College or another different colleges in Maryland, even that you don't qualify for the legalization. And number two, that was another extraordinary victory, is the driver license. We passed the driver license in this year as well for everybody, regardless of the immigration status. And that is a very, very important element and critical component and tool for our families who are going to be undocumented. It's going to be super difficult very, very difficult for those families who are going to be undocumented, because they are going to be target even worse. Because if you are not having document, when we pass the legislation, so the idea is that we need to remove you. And many of them are families who have been here for 20 years, for 30 years, and they don't qualify because they have a small criminal record, right? Like they have some small criminal record and they don't qualify because of that. So it's going to be very, very difficult situation.
Can I just add a little bit
Yeah,
to
go
that?
ahead.
So the Congressional Budget Office score of the bill, they did their analysis and they estimate that 8 of the 11 million people will be legalized by the bill. And our view has always been, as Gustavo said, that we need something swift and really broad and inclusive, because if we replicate the current situation through new legislation, we're not actually fixing the problem. So we need to make sure that that population that is excluded is as small as possible. I think one of the big problems here is that the bill requires that 3 misdemeanors or 1 aggravated felony under immigration law, or 1 felony would exclude someone from the law. And if you've been living in Arizona or in Alabama, that is going to be a serious problem. So we're looking at ways of working within this in the state context for people to maybe be able to open those convictions and do something on the state level to address them. And then the other thing is that we recognizing that millions of workers are not going to leave. They're not going to leave. They have families here. They have this is the only place they know now. And that if they're going to continue to live and work, as Gustavo said, they need driver's licenses, they need the opportunity to go to school, but they also need protections on the job. And so this is a secret. Please don't tell anyone who has anything to do with the House. But there are really good worker protections in the Senate bill. There are protections that that apply across the board, whether documented or undocumented. It fixes the Supreme Court case that denied the undocumented essentially the right to have remedies when they are unlawfully fired. And our approach is like, look, workers are going to have to be able to organize to improve their lot in life. And the best we can do right now is to create the legal structures that allow them, and then work with them and civil society at large to make sure that they have access to those and can enforce those rights.
I think we're at 1:30.
You can take one more.
Can I take one more question? Yeah, go ahead.
So, hi, my name is Jelani. I'm with the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, and I have a question for Anna on E-Verify. So there are provisions in S744 that where if employers give documents to undocumented workers to qualify for registered provisional RPI status, they won't be criminalized or be liable. But I was wondering how it really protects workers that might be exploited if, for example, the worker or the employer will threaten them deportation or something. And what if there's a person who's on their way to RPI status, but there are hiccups in the process? Doesn't that mean they won't be able to find work if everyone has to be able to prove they can work? So I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's going to be a lot of these kinds of questions as we move into implementation. And again, here's another secret. There are protections for workers against what you've been describing in the Senate bill. That everyone in RPI status is presumptively here, is not going to presumptively not go into removal. That for workers, employers are required to give workers the documentation that they need, and there's a penalty on the employer if the employer doesn't give the workers that documentation. There's alternative ways of getting documentation, even through affidavits. So we've tried to think as much of that as we could through in the Senate bill. It's hidden, but it's there.
Don't share all of us.
I know. Don't tell anybody.
Don't disclose all of that.
Well, thank you all so much. I'd like to give our speakers a round of applause. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll be having more. Our next session will be October 2nd. Mark it on your calendars. I hope to see you all again. Thanks again.
You think you